Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good evening, Rush Nation. It's Murf back. It's week 9 review heading into week 10 of the NFL season, and I always get baffled at how quickly the season goes, and it's rolling along even quicker than ever. No Dan tonight, unfortunately. I mean, hopefully he might be here in a bit. Just having a few sort of technical effects and issues going on, so he might join us, he might not, but either way, you've got me here for sort of the next hour or so to talk through. And yeah, I wasn't here last week, but Jack did a great job holding down the fort and holding down my chair, so looking forward to breaking down everything that happened last week. We had a good slate of games. I mean, we had Joe Mixon flirting with one of the biggest touchdown or one of the biggest running back weekends of all time. We had a lot of drama, a lot of one-score games that were really dicing to death. We saw the Raiders throw away another huge lead. We saw the Jets upset the Bills. We saw Tom Brady roll back the years with a late 40-second drive to win the game against the Super Bowl champions. And it's just showing you how good the NFL is. This has definitely been one of those more sort of enjoyable seasons that really is starting to tell these beautiful stories. But let's focus a bit more on the fantasy side. So really, this show now, we're gearing up to the playoffs. There's just 5 weeks of the fantasy regular season left, so there's not long left. And if you're sitting at sort of 4 wins and above, you're still in contention to get into the playoffs. It's just about making those moves. And if it's less than that, then you're going to have to pretty much win out to have any form of shot. 3 wins, I think 2 wins, 1 win, and 0 wins. You're probably safe to say you're ruled out and thinking about next year. Just on that note, I've been posting over the weekend and late last week about the elimination leagues that we've been doing for charity. Winner gets an NFL jersey. So we've done 3 of these leagues. 2 have drafted at the time of recording. 1 is very close to wrapping up. I'm quite prepared now to do another draft if people are up for it. Send me a DM, and if we get enough people to do one, then we'll add you to the competition. But the draft has to get done by Thursday, ideally. So it means we need sort of the most active of people, but always happy to add more and see what we can do to get it going. So at the moment we have 30 people in the tournament. Winner gets an NFL jersey, and there's a structure and there's a form. So if you are interested, drop me a DM at Murf_NFL. I'm always happy to go through that. Next week we will be a bit delayed in getting out the flagship show. So Dan and I are heading to Munich to go and watch the Buccaneers. So very exciting. We don't fly back until sort of early evening Monday, so we're not going to be able to record on Monday. So we need to get our schedules together to see when we can put a pod out. So it might be one of us, might be both of us, but we will get something out to you. But I want to take this time really to focus on, first of all, some news, some injuries, and then also just thinking about some moves that we can make to get into the playoffs and looking at those all important trends going forward. So first, let's recap the injuries. So Josh Allen, although he stayed in the game, did suffer a right elbow injury. It's not the first time he's had this injury. Didn't seem to affect him all that much, especially when he made that big throw to Gabe Davis late on. But having said that, it's still something of a concern given he's had these injuries before. One to monitor, not saying that he's definitely in this, he's going to miss time bubble, but it's one that we do need to keep an eye on. So let's just keep an eye on that. Follow the beat writers, follow us. We'll update you as much as we can. But it is one to keep an eye on. It's one to be slightly concerned about. Aaron Jones, he went out of the game yesterday with an ankle injury. It looks like he's going to be okay. Got some good news with that. So it looks like his X-rays were clear and negative, so it looks like he's in contention to play this week. One such player is Romeo Dobbs, however, is not. So Romeo Dobbs looks like he's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. So in terms of how likely he is to miss time, that's going to, we know he's going to miss time, but in terms of how long he's going to miss, 4 to 6 weeks, we're thinking, okay, so he's back week 14 to 16. I mean, you're looking in now, it's like, is he really going to be someone that you're going to want in the fantasy playoffs, given how badly the Packers and Aaron Rodgers are playing? I would say at this point, if you're fighting for playoff contention and you are not necessarily guaranteed to get there, I would probably be thinking of removing him from my redraft roster and looking to get somebody else in. So that's a key one to keep an eye on. I know there were a lot of people that had some huge hopes for him this year. He did flash, but it doesn't look like it's going to be one that's going to pay out well for the rest of the season. Another Green Bay rookie wide receiver, Christian Watson. He has a concussion. He went through the concussion protocol. Be interesting to see what happens out there. And maybe he is the guy who will get the biggest gain from the Romeo Dobbs injury, given the fact that they are really sort of lacking bodies there. And other than Alan Lazard, yes, they've got Randall Cobb and Sammy Watkins, but those guys haven't really done much for the Packers this season. Another injury concern, Evan Ingram. He's got a back injury, left the game for a bit, one to keep an eye on. Has seen an uptick in targets, has been trending the right direction. So it's a bit of a shame, but this is something that happens with Evan Ingram. Unfortunately, he does get injured a fair whack, so another one to keep an eye on. And then we've got those long-standing or short-standing injuries, so the likes of Jonathan Taylor, Keenan Allen, I think, and Mike Williams. I think Mike Williams is probably going to be out another 2 weeks, maybe 3. Keenan Allen, it's going to be difficult, be hard to see if he's back for week 9. Be one to keep an eye on. And then you've got the likes of Jonathan Taylor, and I think that's a really interesting scenario. So if you are watching this live, you would know that even if you're not watching this live, you would know that Frank Reich, for example, has been fired and this afternoon. And as a result, Jeff Saturday, who has not coached at any level other than high school football, has been instated, has basically been put in charge, interim head coach charge for the Colts. Now, this kind of looks like a tanking move. So when you're thinking about this, you're thinking about you've brought in a coach with zero pedigree of coaching. He's coaching a high school team in Georgia. And first of all, Jeff Saturday was a great player. We're talking about a guy who Hall of Fame player. We're talking about Ring of Honor. We're talking about, one of the best centers to have ever played the game. And I'm not going to besmirch the guy and say he knows absolutely nothing. But at the end of the day, coaching is one of those things you need experience at to be good at it. And he doesn't have any. And the last time we saw a team took this kind of wild gamble, it was Freddie Kitchens. And that didn't work out well. And surprisingly, no one was surprised. Because you have to earn your stripes. It's not a boys' club. You don't seem to have this opportunity to just go ahead and just gain a role with no experience. And I remember Josh McCown was interviewing for roles and people were up in arms because, again, you're talking about a player who hadn't earned his stripes in the, it wouldn't, he hadn't earned his stripes in the coaching community, and that caused some backlash. And that's probably why he didn't get a job. So I think you're looking at this sort of move now with Jeff Saturday. I'm not going to say that he's not going to be a good coach, but we don't know. But this looks like a tanking move. You need to install a guy who has zero coaching experience at college or professional level, and to install him as the head coach. You've already benched your quarterback that you've traded for. Yes, there's arm and shoulder injuries, etc., and that probably factored into the decision, but you're playing a late round quarterback draft pick and who isn't doing the job. I mean, you look at Alec Pierce yesterday. He led the team in receiving yards. I think he had 29 receiving yards. I mean, it's just ridiculous now. And you have to look at it and go, what are the Colts trying to achieve? And then you have to look at this and go, why would they rush back Jonathan Taylor? Because they're not trying to win. So it's not in their best interest to rush along Jonathan Taylor. And I'll talk about his replacement in a bit. But if I've got Jonathan Taylor right now in redraft, I'm severely concerned. If I could get him off my books, I would be doing that. I don't know what you can get for him. That's the difficulty, because he is injured. Anyone that's clued up might be realizing that actually he could realistically be shut down or limited for the rest of the season. So it's a very difficult landscape for a guy who drafted 101. If you're playing in a home league and you've got sort of very casual fans, you could probably do quite well out of the trade, and you could probably get someone like a Miles Sanders and maybe a receiver, or you could get Ramondre Stevenson and a receiver and trade on name value and big up what's going on. But if you're playing with quite smart people, I doubt you're going to get a lot for him. And then you're in this really difficult quandary of, what do you take for Jonathan Taylor? The truth is, I don't know. I think you need to get some form of service level replacement. But especially if you're very much low down. So I think if you're sitting there with 7 wins upwards, I think you can trade Jonathan Taylor quite easily. Sorry, excuse me. I think if you are 3, 4, 5 wins, I think you need to trade him. I think the difference is you can take more of a risk with the 7, 8, 9 wins, because you can be a bit more flexible in your approach. You're winning without Jonathan Taylor, so you can, you trade him for a piece that's going to add some value, add an asset to your side. When it comes to the 3, 4, 5, 6 wins, that's going to be a little bit more tricky. You're going to need to find probably a replacement to start in case. And there's a couple of names I'll suggest later. But I think we're talking about trade deadlines, so I'm going to get to that in a second in leagues. We need to start thinking about moving on someone like Jonathan Taylor, the same way we need to move on a few other players. Because if you stick with Jonathan Taylor now, and they do decide to fold him for the rest of the season, or just limit him, again, they're not trying to win. So there's no incentive for them to sit there and put a load of workload on Jonathan Taylor. He is, I want to say, the future of this franchise. But he's certainly going to play a very big part next season. So to run the legs off him now just doesn't make any sense. So you need to think of ways and be creative in getting rid of Jonathan Taylor. Whether that's taking, someone like Leonard Fournette could be a really good opportunity, because he's a player who's got a bye week coming. Players might look at that and go, well, we can try and get Jonathan Taylor. We can roll the dice and see what happens. Fournette's not putting up huge numbers. I expect Fournette's fortunes to change a little bit, and I think he's someone who will trend more into the ascendancy. And there's a few players I'd recommend as well, but just something to definitely think about as we're going through this. Keenan Allen's a difficult one. You're definitely not going to get anything for him, but he looks like he should be back. And if Mike Williams is out for a few weeks, he should reap the rewards. He should be back to, if he's healthy, he should be fine. That's really it for sort of injury news. There's a few others to keep an eye on. They were sort of the major ones that came out of yesterday, or the major ones that we're tracking. And then obviously we're looking at Ryan Tannehill. Is he going to come back? But if you're relying on Ryan Tannehill right now, you're probably in a really difficult spot and probably not one to need to focus on. So I want to focus a little bit more on strategy for making your playoffs. And if you're watching this live, just jump in with some comments and thoughts or questions, and I'm happy to sort of answer them. But in terms of strategy for the playoffs now, so you've got 5 weeks after tonight to get to the playoffs. And there's a few different ways that you can view this. The first thing I would be looking to do is looking at strength of schedule. So I'd be looking to see who has favorable matchups coming up. I'd be looking at usage. So I'd be sitting there thinking about who is getting targets, even though they're not necessarily appearing in the box score. So who has been trending in the target areas, running the most routes, but maybe hasn't necessarily hit that peak in the box score, because I think you'll find some good value there. And I'll share some of that with you in the matchup show later on in the week. Um, but there's some real basic things that you can do as a fantasy owner. I say this every year, and I think it's a really good reminder to think about this, which is to think about how you can gain an edge. And I always say that fantasy managers who win leagues outwork their opponents, and to do that, it's being active on the waiver wire. That's using all your bench spots, really utilizing those. It's not holding on to players who you're just hoping might do something one day. It's constantly rotating those players. It's very, very common that the fantasy manager who makes the most transactions probably makes the playoffs and makes the championship game, because they're the ones that are looking for the edge. They're looking to take gambles. And if you are sitting in that 3 to 6 win category, well, 3 to 5 win category, you probably need to take a few gambles just to make sure you get your place, especially 3 and 4 wins, because you're going to need to win the majority of your games to get in. So to do that, you need to look at players trending up. You need to think about players that you've got. If you've had a player on your bench and he's not played for 4 games, you probably need to cut him. And you either need to cut him for something else, or you need to, think about ways in which you can invite more roster spots. If your QB's had a bye, if you're playing Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and you've got a backup QB on your bench, he needs to go, because you're never playing him. Like, there's no point. And if one of those 3 players goes down, you're probably not winning your league anyway. So you can't play with this whole negative feeling of I've got quarterbacks on my bench. It just doesn't work. I play in a league and there's so many quarterbacks that are on benches in a redraft league. It's crazy. There's one guy holding 4 QBs in a 1 QB start league. Like, it doesn't work. You think like, okay, well, I'm holding them from the other players. That's fine, but you're also losing the value of your bench spots and the ability to rotate during bye weeks. And you kind of that strategy doesn't work long term to try and deny people. You're much better off rotating your roster spots, bringing in a lot of wide receivers. I don't think there's a lot of running back depth on the waiver wire, so I'd be looking to bring in wide receivers. One running back I would target is Isaiah Pacheco. He's out there. I would be looking to pick him up, but I'd be looking to pick up some other wide receiver pieces and just getting them rotated in and just shooting for the moon, looking at opportunities and thinking about who we can get edges off. Because if you're just sitting there holding players and not using your bench, that's 5-6 spots on your roster you're just wasting, and it's a really big part of it. The trade deadline's in 2 weeks or 1 week, depending on your league. It could be up as soon as Monday. It could be another week. And you might not even have a trade deadline. But if you do, it's typically week 10, week 11. So we're coming up to it. You need to identify players that you can sell now and get ahead of the curve. And I'm going to give you some names. Talked about Jonathan Taylor already, but I'm going to give you some names that I think you can consider selling. And give you some names that you should consider going out there and trying to buy. Because I think it's really important to think about how you can try and get extra games on your roster and extra points. Now, if you've got a running back who hasn't had a bye week yet, and someone like Joe Mixon, and you could get someone like Miles Sanders and a wide receiver in return, you should absolutely do that, because you get the extra week's production. You've already seen the buyout, so that's going to help you out. Plus, you're looking at factors, and I'll talk about Joe Mixon in a bit. I've already talked about him, but in case you've missed it. Other things you should do, you should look at your opponent's schedule. You should look at where they've got buys. If you're playing in a fab league, you should see where your fab is against everybody else. You should see how much fab is left in play and see where your opponents might likely pay for players in fab, and look at where you can get some discounts. If you see that a player's on buy this week and you might see some players being dropped that are going to go on to buy, there could be a really good opportunity to pick those up for next to nothing this week, because they're not ones that people will be targeting. So there's some really good tips, but just look at the schedule. If you're heavily favored in a lot of those matchups, you can be a little bit more conservative. If you're playing against a lot of the top of the league opposition and you're likely to project to lose, you're going to have to make some trades and make some swings. And if that means getting the best player in your in your roster off in order to facilitate that and gain more depth and more quality, then you absolutely should do that. Having Christian McCaffrey at this stage, if you're losing, isn't helpful. If you can trade Christian McCaffrey for Miles Sanders, Tyler Boyd, DK Metcalf, and maybe you give something else in return, that's going to help you a lot more. Because think of the total point scale. Let's say McCaffrey gets you 20 points a week. Well, Miles Sanders is going to get you 15, 16 points a week. DK Metcalf's going to get you 10 to 15 points a week. Tyler Boyd, similar. So you're going to end up net ahead, especially when you factor in, and you've got to factor in the players you would drop, but you should be factoring in ahead. You'll have a bit more depth to play with. So if you are sitting there and you need to gamble, they're the kind of moves that you need to make. You need to get if you were sitting there on 3 wins, 4 wins, and you're holding someone like a Christian McCaffrey, or you're holding someone like an AJ Brown, or holding someone like a Justin Jefferson or a Cooper Kupp, looking at maybe moving those players on in order to get a huge haul back and facilitating a trade that will allow you to get into the playoffs is a big move. It's obviously one that's going to be unpopular with certain players, but the goal is to make the playoffs and see what happens and cause chaos. The team that finishes first in the regular season isn't guaranteed anything. And you've probably played in enough leagues to know that not to say very rarely, but it's more uncommon than not that the first seed ends up winning it all. So you need to get in the tournament in order to have a chance. And if that means you move on your best player to do that, then you absolutely have to do that. On the flip side, if you're 7 and 9 wins, maybe even 6 wins at this point, it's a very different story. You can start to look at your roster. You can start to plan ahead. Look at who's got good playoff schedules. Look who are players that you could potentially pick up and block. Look at streaming options for DSTs for the playoffs and rotating your roster and keeping it fresh. There's some big moves that you've got to make, but you're future proofing. You're thinking ahead. You don't get too cocky. You don't sit there and assume you're going to make it, but you'd like to think if you've racked up, especially 7 to 9 wins right now, you're going to rack off the requisite one the 3 wins that you're going to need to get to over the next 5 weeks to cement that place. And if you're on 6 wins, you should feel pretty good that you've got a good chance to get in as well. So it's about not necessarily making the trades, but you're in those positions where you can acquire a big player. So if I was looking at someone who has got 3 wins and they've got Christian McCaffrey, you can be aggressive. You can try and go out there and get Christian McCaffrey and go give up 2, maybe 3 players to go and get him, to go and get yourself a team full of league winners. They're the sorts of moves that can win you championships. So, it works both ways. If you're chasing, you probably need to get rid of your best player. If you're winning, you can probably acquire some really good pieces by trading off some of your depth and maybe a star, but to get an absolute stud back. Someone like Derrick Henry is someone who's not the world's most favorite trade target, but given his schedule in the fantasy playoffs, he's someone I'd be looking to acquire if I was on the championship chasing roster, because his strength of schedule is amazing in the playoffs. So he has, in the playoffs, he has the Chargers, the Texans, and then the Cowboys. So the Cowboys isn't the world's greatest matchup, but it's not terrible. But those other 2 are huge. And we know what Derrick Henry can do, and he can absolutely gash teams, especially as the Titans are playing for a seed in the playoffs and chasing the division, and they look well placed to win the division quite comfortably. So, you're looking at Derrick Henry being the best way that they do that, especially if they do make that switch to Malik Willis away from Ryan Tannehill. And they might not do that. It's hard to tell what they're going to do at this stage. They might think that Tannehill's the best route for them to win now, and I would probably agree. But that's a situation that is in flux, and you can you can cash in and use Derrick Henry as a reason to go for that and maybe put somebody off into trading him. So I think they're the sorts of moves that you need to make. There aren't that many marquee running backs this season. There aren't that many running backs that are making those huge strides who are difference makers. So if you can go out and buy one of those pieces right now, and you're a 6 win and above team, you should probably do it before your trade deadline. And if you haven't, or if you've already got that cemented, maybe look at wide receivers and see who you can pick up. Be aggressive. This is the opportunity for you to try and win your league. I mentioned Fab, but yeah, look at Fab. Look and see how much Fab everyone's got left. Look at where they're likely to spend it. I think that's really important. I think as well, look at who you're playing and when, if they've got buys coming up, especially week 14, and look at where you can maybe get some casual blocks in. That's DSTs, kickers, wide receivers, quarterbacks, wherever there might be an opportunity And this is where you need every bench spot, because you might need to play those kind of tactics in order to stick in. It's a bit of game theory now, where if you can map out your path, look at where you're likely to stumble, look at where you're likely to win. And if it comes down to that week 14 matchup, what can you do a week or two in advance to take the advantage away from your opponent? And that is, working the waiver wire 1 to 2 weeks in advance. And you're going to need to do that. That's a big change. People tend to look at this week to week, but actually you need to look beyond the week. One of the things I was going to ask Dan, if he was here, was, does the DFS mindset work in this scenario? I don't know. I'm not a big DFS player, but I wonder if it does. I wonder if looking at that from a DFS perspective is something that could work. I don't know for sure, but it'd be interesting to see if it does. I would look at schedules of players. I'd look at good cornerback matchups versus bad cornerback matchups. I'd look at where low volume teams with a second wide receiver could be strong, and look at matchups where that's likely to happen. These are some of the things that you should be doing, and just outworking your opponents, making notes on your remaining opponents, get a spreadsheet out, get a Word doc out, or Google Doc, or whatever. Make a notes of all your opponents for the rest of the season. Look at where they're weak, look at where they're strong, look at where you can capitalize. If you don't think you can win a matchup, go out and make a trade now to see if you can get ahead of that matchup and try and win it. These are some of the moves that you will need to make. It's really important. So there's some strategy advice there that I would be looking at going forward for the rest of the season. So now looking at some usage. So there's some usage scenarios in which I'll be going through, as I do every week. So we'll start off with the Miami Dolphins. So the Miami Dolphins acquired Jeff Wilson. At the trade deadline, very busy trade deadline, and he's very much just capped Raheem Mostert quite significantly. So he's pretty much come in, he's played 50% of the snaps. He's played a lot of the early down work. He shared the goal line work. He got a good portion of the short yardage. Got a good chunk of the third down work. Raheem Mostert still dominates the 2-minute drill. But what Jeff Wilson's done now is he's taken Raheem Mostert and pretty much just not cast him to one side, but he's turned this into a committee, which, if you were an owner of Raheem Mostert, is incredibly annoying, because Raheem Mostert's career now just seems to be overtaken by Jeff Wilson no matter where he goes. So Jeff Wilson becomes someone that you can add. He's probably been dropped in so many places after the Christian McCaffrey trade, and then it was like, well, he's not going to get anywhere. So now it looks like he's going to be someone that is going to get some work going forward. So his is an interesting usage. I can't see a ceiling on him, but I do think there's something to be not concerned about, but there's something to, if you're a Raheem Mostert owner, you now have to temper your expectations of what he's going to be doing rest of the season, especially if you think about that was a high shootout game. All game scripts are effectively imply stayed one score for a good chunk of it, and we still didn't see Raheem Mostert dominate. And this is Jeff Wilson just getting the playbook. There's some alarm bells for me as a Raheem Mostert owner, so one I would be looking at very carefully. Right, let's move on to the Rams backfield. And look, I get it. They played the Buccaneers yesterday, but at the end of the day, their situation right now, Cam Akers has come back into the team, and it's just very difficult to see what's going on. What I would say is these guys are probably worth owning, but none of them are worth starting. So yesterday, Darrell Henderson played half the snaps, which is kind of what you would, you'd expect him to have more, but he played half the snaps. He dominated the early down work, but he pretty much got almost no usage he got no usage at all in short yardage. None of the running backs got any usage in the 2-minute drill. And then he only played one snap on third down, and the rest of it went to Malcolm Brown. Look, here's what I'd say when it comes to the Rams is that I think you don't worry about Malcolm Brown. He's not worth having. Henderson, Akers, and Williams, I'm talking about Kyron Williams here, who's due to come back off IR, are probably worth owning in leagues that are deep enough to where they should be owned, but none of them should be anywhere near your starting lineups right now, because none of them can be relied upon. None of them are going to get enough volume in order to carry a top 24 finish or even a top 30 finish at the rate it's going right now. And they're kind of all eating each other. So I would say right now that these are players that if you can trade and get something useful for them, then absolutely do it. But at the same token, I think they're a good hold. But then, unless something needs to come out of that room, whether the Akers situation deteriorates again, I don't, whether Kyron Williams never gets going, it's hard to kind of see what's going to happen going forward. But they need to make some changes. The Rams, they're 3-5. They're kind of losing touch with the division. They're going to need to make some changes quick, and to do that, they need to go back to the run game. So that's why I'd hold them. I think you're going to see, if I had to hold one play in particular, Henderson, because of the fact he's playing half the snaps, is the guy I think they see the most potential in, but he's not been overly effective. He's not been that great. And the concern there is someone could take the job, but someone needs to. And I think if you are owning those players, someone's going to have to usurp and take the majority of the workload there. Speaking of running backs, let's talk about James Conner, right? So James Conner yesterday returned back from this rib injury. He only ran the ball 7 times for 45 yards, but the team played from behind for the majority of the game. But he also caught 5 passes. Here's what I'd say about James Conner. First of all, Benjamin, pretty ineffective in his time. He had one decent game, but on the whole, wasn't an overly effective player. So James Conner, I think, in the start of the season, he was kind of splitting some time with Benjamin. I think what you're going to see is James Conner dominate that role. I think he's going to go back to what we saw James Conner last season. I don't necessarily think with the same touchdown rate. This offense definitely has regressed. So I don't think you're going to see the same touchdown production, but I think you're going to see the same volume of touches. They ran the ball very well last season. They haven't done so well this season. I think they need to get James Conner fit fully to do that. I would say this. Arizona have a really difficult schedule in the next sort of 4 weeks. So Arizona's schedule, and there's a bye in here as well. But, they've got some difficult games coming up where they've got, the Chargers, the Patriots in there. They've got a few difficult games, but actually their fantasy playoff schedule is incredible. So after the Patriots week 14, they've got the Broncos, the Buccaneers, which is a tough game to be fair, but they finish with the Falcons. And as a result, when you equate all of that in, he has the 6th easiest schedule for running backs, even with the Buccaneers in there, because week 17 against the Falcons, they can't stop the run. That's a huge plus matchup in championship week. So if you've got an owner that's very frustrated, and we're talking about trade deadlines here, James Conner's worth an ad. Especially if you are in a position where you can be aggressive, because there's a struggle. He's going to struggle for the next week, maybe the next couple of weeks. And then there's a bye to negotiate in there as well. But if he gets up to full speed for the playoffs, he's going to be an absolute monster. And he potentially could be putting up RB1 weeks. So if you're sitting there with 6, 7, 8, 9 wins, he's someone I'd be looking to acquire, because I think you can buy him relatively cheap with the injuries, the bye weeks to come. If you can work through all of that, I think you get a guy with great matchups in the playoffs, minus the Buccaneers. And I think especially week 17, that championship week, if he's healthy, that could be a game-winning and a potentially league-winning week. So James Conner is someone I would be looking to go out in this sort of 2-week, 1-week trade window and trying to acquire as much of us as I can. The Jets wide receiver room. So, we've talked about them a few times. I've said it's kind of Garrett Wilson season. Very much is Garrett Wilson season. So where Elijah Moore was, Garrett Wilson's taken over. Elijah Moore no longer really a thing. It's interesting because basically what's happening is now Denzel Mims has come in and he's basically playing the Corey Davis role, which is strange because we kind of thought Denzel Mims was kind of done, and now he's kind of back, but he's not, fantasy relevant. Elijah Moore's really only playing in 3 wide receiver sets, and he's lining up in the slot, so he's not going to get the deep ball. It's likely he's probably going to move on in the off season. So, and then we're seeing Braxton Berrios. He's getting slot snaps in the slot as well. So, and then we've got this offense that isn't overly brilliant. Zach Wilson hasn't been overly great, but we can rely on really one piece of this offense, and that's Garrett Wilson. So if you've got Garrett Wilson, you're in a good place. I'm not saying he's one I'd go and trade for, but as much as I think he's got a relatively good schedule coming up over the next few weeks, the problem with that is relying on the Jets offense to remain and be consistent, which is not something that we've seen so often. His fantasy playoff schedule is pretty good because he does have the Lions and the Jags in there before Seattle in week 17. So again, thinking ahead, if you can survive the next few weeks with, a guy who's probably rest of the season somewhere between wide receiver 30, wide receiver 36, he could get an hour up into wide receiver 2 territory for the playoffs and beyond if they really start to utilize and unlock him. So there's a potential one to look at there. Justin Fields finally arrived in the NFL. We've been waiting a long time. 178 yards rushing yesterday, which is an NFL record for rushing by a quarterback in a single regular season game. So this was his third consecutive top 5 fantasy performance, and it's his 5th consecutive as a top 12 starting fantasy quarterback. Now, Justin Fields is someone I was very in on early in the season. It hasn't really panned out until now. He's someone I've held on to. And I have a lot of this sort of Brady and Fields QB tandem, and now I can flip them. So now I can start Fields and I can bench Brady because we can see, and I'll talk about Brady in a minute, but we can see the trend going upwards for Justin Fields, not just as a rushing quarterback, although that's absolutely massive, but actually just his accuracy is improving. The balls are better. We saw Darnell Mooney starting to be the kind of player that we thought he would be. Cole Kmet's finally turned up and scored touchdowns. I mean, Cole Kmet's so frustrating because I absolutely knew at some point he was going to score touchdowns, but he was so bad in the opening 7 weeks of the season that I think he was cut everywhere. And actually, Cole Kmet's someone that if he is available on waiver wise, he's someone you should target because now they're starting to see the effectiveness of it. You saw 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, even despite only scoring 1 in his previous 2.5 years. Maybe slightly overreaction to this 2-game trend, but I want to jump on the train and see what happens because I always thought there was a way that if they could get him into games, especially given the reception totals, I think it would be better. Chase Claypool got involved. I think that's going to take time. I think people are going to get overexcited on Chase Claypool. I think I'd curb that. By the time he gets, we've seen that, and I don't mean this with any disrespect to Justin Fields, he takes time to learn. He takes time to develop. He takes time to get to where he needs to get to. And perform at that sort of level. So I don't think he builds that relationship with Chase Claypool over the next 6-7 weeks. There might be a big boom week in there. I wouldn't know. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter either way. You have to look at this situation and go, Chase Claypool, someone that you can ignore, but Darnell Mooney, someone who could potentially trend up as a result of Chase Claypool being there. But what we do know is Justin Fields is starting to reach that potential in fantasy football, at least, that we expected. So he's a must start going forward and someone that you should feel pretty good putting in your fantasy lineups. And especially if you're like me, you took a lot of him. He's been on your bench all season, including yesterday. That's fine. That's process. We're at the stage now where he's usurped Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. Dare I say, even Justin Herbert, until Justin Herbert gets his weapons back, I'd probably be looking to make that move as well. Isaiah Pacheco, right? So Isaiah Pacheco is still available in a ton of leagues. He's going to be in my waiver wire column or waiver wire podcast tomorrow. So sneak preview. We saw that he took the majority, very small majority over Clyde Edwards-Helaire before the bye. And people can look at the box score yesterday and go, well, Pacheco didn't do anything, but actually really none of the running backs did. That's because Kansas City pretty much abandoned the run. They were behind in this game very early. The run went out of the equation. And they just, as such, just basically just put the ball in the air. And none of these guys really got anything. But if we're looking ahead at schedule, the Chiefs have 6 of their 9 remaining opponents have losing records with 3 or fewer wins. So they're playing really bad teams on the back end. I'd lock the Chiefs right now to probably be in the mix for the 1 or the 2 slot. So as a result, they're going to be able to be in games where they can control the pace of the game, not just putting the ball in the air, but running the football. So if we've seen the fact that Isaiah Pacheco has been trending upwards, he started to get more snaps than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He started to be named as the starter. And that's not a huge thing, but it's noteworthy. And that's what I mean by that. And so if they're playing these teams that are bad, these 3 win and below teams that are perceived to be bad, you're going to see these young guys get the work, especially if they're in control of games. So they're going to give the ball to Pacheco. They're going to give the ball to Tony. They're going to give the ball to all of these guys. And that should mean that we're likely to see more work, because and that's what I mean. It's going to be much better news for Pacheco. Pacheco, someone who's going to get this potential volume. Now, I'm not sitting here pretending he's going to be like this RB1 amazing, but we're looking at opportunities where players can excel. The matchups look good for him. The opportunities are all trending in the right direction. So in those games where they're playing a poor team, they've got this great opportunity now to use Pacheco. I'm just reading about Josh Allen. He's likely to be limited this week in practice, but he should be okay. So one to watch for the week. But yeah, I'd just be looking at Pacheco as someone who could emerge from the pack and someone who could potentially be a solid contributor on your roster. So I'd be adding him, especially fantasy playoffs. You know, you're looking at their roster. They've got the Texans, the Seahawks, and then the Broncos. So not the worst matchups for the fantasy playoffs. I think outside of Baltimore, Carolina, and that's it. They've got the third easiest schedule for running backs coming in as it stands right now. Sorry, the Jets, fourth easiest. So yeah, definitely one I'd be getting on is Isaiah Pacheco. So again, another play on the flip side of that, looking at the situation, if I own Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'd be trying to push him out. I'm not saying that he's not going to be good in these games, but it clearly is trending towards Isaiah Pacheco. Cash in now while you still can in redraft or even in Dynasty and get what you can for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because this end of the season could be potentially a little bit brutal for him. The other thing about Pacheco is really, and the reason why they're trending this way and why he's just a really good running back. 2.2 yards after contact he's gaining. It's one of the best in the league. That anywhere over 2 is a really significantly good number. I talked about this in the past with someone like Khalil Herbert. So they're the signs I look at. I was like players that are really, really going to get those opportunities to break away and make big plays. So Isaiah Pacheco for me is one I'd be really looking at. Talked about it a couple of weeks ago, sell Joe Mixon. You can think of mad 5 touchdown game yesterday. And if you sold him before, okay, I'll take the hit. But right now, if you're sitting there with Joe Mixon's share and he scored 5 touchdowns for you and he's won you a game, guess what? Hit the sell button, go and find a way to get rid of him. Again, he's still only, even after yesterday's game, he's still only at 0.9 yards per contact after contact. It's still not good. He's just getting through on these touchdowns. It's not sustainable. It's going to get to the situation where the touchdowns will dry up. So we've seen this. This is the peak for me. The peak you're going to get out of Joe Mixon. It is going to get worse. Because, yes, okay, he got the yardage yesterday, got the volume yesterday. Not going to argue that. And as long as he's getting that kind of usage, he's going to be fine. But if he gets a game where he's only getting 15 touches and he's only averaging on the ground, he's averaging 3.9, not even like 3.3 to 3.9 yards per carry. He's getting so few yards after carry, and that number hasn't changed for weeks. It's been 0.9 yards after carry. So it's not like, oh, he's just going for phases. No, this is where he is. This is where he is right now this season. I'd be selling Joe Mixon. I've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it again. His playoff schedule is the Bucs, the Patriots, the Bucs, the Patriots, and the Bills. The Patriots don't give up RB1 weeks at all. The Buccaneers, we've seen what they can do stuffing the run, and the Bills as well. I mean, that's gross. I mean, that's a really gross playoff schedule. Cash in now, especially on the back of this game. You can probably get a king's ransom for Joe Mixon right now. So, for me, players I really want in exchange, Ramondre Stevenson, they've got the same buy, so you lose nothing there. Miles Sanders, who's already had his buy, he'd be a player I'd definitely be looking to acquire. Absolutely. I think if I can get those sorts of players plus a wide receiver, which I think you can do right now on the strength of this performance, then you absolutely need to do that. I think it's really important that you get Joe Mixon off those rosters, because in championship week, he could be a real hindrance. Someone asked me earlier, would you take Dalvin Cook? No, not the way that offense is rolling. It's definitely going through the air. It's definitely not evolving as much, Dalvin Cook. And then you've got the injury concerns of Dalvin Cook. Not for me. Not a player I'd be looking to get much of. If you could sell Joe Mixon, who's currently the RB. I'm looking at it in PPR, but I think he's the RB2. In fact, he's the RB2 in fact in PPR leagues. Could you get him for Derrick Henry straight up? Or I'd love to do it. If I could do that, I would. Maybe Saquon, who's not going the right way, but that schedule opens up for Saquon towards the end of the season. That could be a situation, especially if they're in playoff situations. That could be an interesting one to take advantage of. I wouldn't do Josh Jacobs. If you could get Leonard Fournette maybe with something, I think Leonard Fournette's going to come back to the pass and be a really useful piece of this offense. Kenneth Walker, if you get Kenneth Walker in the piece, I think these are all doable trades right now. I'd be getting Joe Mixon off my roster if I can get, Ken Walker scored in 6 consecutive games. And he's a big part of that offense. I think you could do that trade, worst case, straight up, and I think you'll be better off. But if not, if you can get him and Garrett Wilson, that could be a really, really good trade for you come playoff time. So I'd be looking to do that bit of business just on Kenneth Walker. He has got the Chiefs and the Jets week 15, 16, and 17. So not the terrible matchups. Certainly better than Joe Mixon's. Let's talk about Neon Dion. So talked about JT potentially being shut down. So Dion Jackson for me becomes someone that is highly relevant. I'm not saying that Dion Jackson is going to be a top 12 running back because I don't think he is. But if I'm having to look outside the box and think outside the box and think of just someone who can just emerge as it happens every year where someone comes out of the doldrums, Dion Jackson's not a bad bet for that. Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that that Jonathan Taylor is not going to be used to full capacity. Again, they might use running backs they've acquired, and we can see what happens there. But at the end of the day, I just think it's a difficult situation. They're trying to lose games now. The passing game is awful. Alec Pierce, as I said, 28-29 receiving yards yesterday, led the team. It's just a joke. I mean, and they're going to run the ball more. That's the bottom line. And Jackson didn't get a lot going yesterday. They were behind. It was a difficult game. They put up 3 points on offense. That's not going to be the same every week. I think Dion Jackson's a guy I'm looking at now thinking he's someone who could be fantasy relevant. By the way, week 17, he's got the Giants. That's a great matchup. If someone's going to come out of the doldrums to do something, but then, and again, the easiest way to lose a game is to consistently run the ball over and over and over again. Because whilst you might end up with some plus yardage at some point, you're not going to make those big chunk plays. It's very hard to go 100 yards running the football a lot. And I think this is what you can see the Colts expecting to do especially in the last few weeks of the season, as they're trying to get a really high draft pick, as they're looking to get a Stroud or Bryce Young or whoever's going to come into the draft. So I really think Dion Jackson is an out of the box play in fantasy football. So I'm not saying you get much to acquire him, but do you know what? If you can get him in a make weight in a trade, just like, I'll give you I don't know. I say, for example, you agree to trade and you acquire Tyler Boyd for, I don't know, DK Metcalf, for example, right? Or Tyler Lockett. You do that trade. You go, okay, well, can I have Dion Jackson as well? You probably, more often than not, they're going to go, yeah, all right, fine. Especially at this point before the deadline when Jonathan Taylor gets shut down. I think that's likely to be someone that you can just get as a throw-in a trade. So if you're trading with the person who has Dion Jackson, just ask for him to be thrown in. You never know. If he's on your waiver wire, pick him up. He's not going to cost a lot on the back of last week's performance. So, yeah, just see what we can get. He might get dropped, because if Jonathan Taylor comes back this week, Dion Jackson's going to be dropped a lot. So do that. Pick him up, and you never know what might happen. Just see that situation transpiring. That could be a situation where Dion Jackson becomes a guy who becomes a top 24 running back by the end of the season, and that's going to be valuable to you to have a player like that on your roster. Cover off the last 2 bye weeks, and like I said, week 17, really good matchup. If you're hanging around trying to win a championship, Dion Jackson could be a guy who brings it home. You never know what happens. I I talked about this already. Aaron Rodgers has not had a 20-point game this season. He's been awful. Season's best is 16.88. We're at the point now where Aaron Rodgers is actually droppable in fantasy football, which is crazy. Someone might pick him up and he might do a really good job rest of the season. Who knows what happens? But if you have Aaron Rodgers as your starting quarterback, you're not going to win many more games this season. You need to make a change. If you can get Justin Fields, do that as a like-for-like swap. But at this point, it's just we're just looking at him now as I don't know what his fantasy outlook is for Dynasty. I'm not going to project. I'm not going to try and guess. He could come back. Never write off Aaron Rodgers, but he is the QB 14 in fantasy football right now. And, he's going to lose even more ground. I mean, to give you an example, he's 13 points better off than Jacoby Brissett, and he's played a game more. Like that is where we're at now with Aaron Rodgers. So he's absolutely droppable. I mean, the fact that even someone like Marcus Mariota is getting significantly more points than Aaron Rodgers is telling you everything you need to know. Another one, QB9 on the season, Tom Brady is another guy you can probably bench. It's 5th game in a row now without a 20-point game, but he has at least had one and another one that was just short of 20. I think they turn it around after the bye. At least that's probably me as a fan talking. So we'll see what happens. But right now, like I said, I've got this Fields Brady stack in about 8 leagues. I will be rotating them and playing Fields going forward. If you're in the same boat as me, do the same thing. It's not panned out with Brady. That's one I'll definitely have to take an L on this season. I really expect them to cook in Brady's last season to point to prove. And I still think there's an opportunity for them to do that, but they haven't done it in the easy games this season against the Steelers and against the Carolina Panthers. So, I think we've seen enough now by week 9 to make a judgment call there. I think that's going to do it. And like I said, if you want any advice on trading over the next sort of couple of days, reach out to me. I'm not great on would you trade this for this? Give me a scenario you're in, and then let's try and work out some numbers. Best way to think of a trade is look at a team. If you're really strong at running back and really weak at wide receiver, find a team that's really weak at running back and really strong at wide receiver. They're good trade partners. You go ahead and you can probably get a really good trade out there. Don't try and win the trade. Just try and get a really good trade. But try and sneak Dion Jackson or just try and get a little something extra in there if you can. Like I said, if you can get Joe Mixon for if you can sell Joe Mixon, get Ramondre Stevenson, Miles Sanders, and a wide receiver, I'm definitely doing that, especially if you can get someone like Tyler Boyd, like Tyler Lockett. If you can get them onto your roster, a player that's trending upwards ever so quietly, someone like Mike Evans, I think, he's not got great yards off the catch, but he's getting more and more red zone targets now. I think he's someone that you can potentially try and get as a make weight in the trade because of all the disappointment with this Buccaneers offense. There's some things I would do. And if you want to workshop some ideas, contact me at Murf_NFL, and I'm happy to talk through them. I'll be back tomorrow for some waiver wire, and then we'll be back at some point next week to break down week 10. Dan and I will give our overview of Munich. We're very looking forward to flying out there on Saturday. We're going to the Hofbrauhaus. If you are going, drop me a DM. Let's try and hook up and meet. We'll be at the Hofbrauhaus on Saturday for the Buccaneers event. I think it's ticket only, so you'll need to find a way to get a ticket. And then Sunday we'll be at the game. I'll be there with a bit of a contingent, but I'm looking forward to meeting as many fans as possible. So if you're going, do reach out to me directly, and let's try and hook up, get some photos, have a beer, have some fun. Still trying to work out when I'm going to watch the games afterwards as well. But you don't want to hear about my travel plans, but we will be back at some point next week. I'll try and announce it on Twitter when we're back. Do reach out with any fancy questions. This is sort of the business end of the season now. The next couple of weeks are absolutely massive. They're going to be the difference between you making your playoffs and not. Get smart with your trades. Get really, really sharp. Make the trades that you need to make. If you're struggling, get your best player off the roster. Get a haul back. If you're in a really strong position, go and acquire those really strong pieces. So even if it means leveling up a 3-4 win team, that's fine, because if you've got the bigger piece, you'll be able to make do with the pieces that you'll shift to acquire that big piece. So that's going to do it for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, don't forget, keep rushing.